Welcome to the Glenn Gould Foundation's Promise of Music Forum and our session on the musical infant, how rhythm structures early neural, communicative, and social development. You may have heard of Glenn Gould, a famous Canadian pianist, but you might not know about our foundation, so I'll just provide you with a little bit of information about us. Glenn Gould used his talent and celebrity to reach people beyond the confines of what was traditionally accepted during his time. A revolutionary, he bridged the human divide of the East-West Cold War barrier through his performances in the USSR. In the studio, he transformed the way music was recorded and explored the use of new electronic technologies, television and radio, to reach a larger audience. Finally, he set the example of the power of music to impact lives. The Glenn Gould Foundation exists to extend Canadian and international awareness of Gould's spirit and legacy by promoting creativity, celebrating innovation and excellence, encouraging cultural diplomacy, and introducing programs that demonstrate the power of music and the arts to transform lives. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us this week. The Promise of Music Forum and the World Congress doesn't happen without your attendance, and so we're so appreciative that you've joined us. On behalf of the Foundation, thank you for spending this next session with us. I'd love to welcome Dr. Marco Battaglia to introduce our next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will keep it short. I won't be talking, which is good news. I will facilitate as much as I can today's encounter. Maybe it won't be needed. Make sure you ask questions to Dr. Trainer, who is going to present some really interesting stuff. My understanding of Dr. Trainer's work is of someone who's really deeply involved in understanding the neuroplasticity, how the brain develops in time, and how these dovetails with musical abilities. Affective neuroscience is one big chapter. So how much cognitions and emotion go hand in hand when it comes to music. And this is one of the biggest questions, if you ask me, about human history, evolution, and I would say the ability to adapt to this world. Of course, we all know that our species is unique in adapting to an ever-changing world, and our brain is, with little doubt, the most plastic, which means, by definition, that when we come to the world, there are very few things that we can do, almost nothing. And that's the basis of our plasticity. The brain comes to the world with a lot of potentialities, but very little inborn abilities. So a lot of things need to be learned. This is one of the great strengths, but also one of the great frailties of human brain. Some people believe that some of the human mental health ailments actually derive from these astonishing plasticity. It's impossible to think of the human brain as a plastic organism without parental care. We are the only species with such a prolonged amount in time and intensity of parental care. We are harmless. So without those fundamental months, years of interaction with parents or parental figures, one nice thing is we are able to develop multiple parental figures, not just one, which is another astonishing, I would say, not just human, but almost exquisitely human capacity. So I can't think of anything more fundamental, more compelling than Dr. Trainer's work. I'm sure she will take you by the hand, go through these things, and I'm sure she will elicit many questions. I might ask myself a few questions, but I would really encourage you in the first place to ask her. She's been traveling the world. She's been presented at 4 corners of the world. It would be very long to enumerate all her abilities, but to anyone who is in the business, she published in, I would say, all the best journals that many people in our job would be ready to kill their aunt to do. I would. All my aunts are gone, unfortunately. Anyways, Laura, please join us.
Yeah, so thanks very much, and I hope you're enjoying the conference. It's really quite amazing the whole week, and I'm so happy to be here. I thought, there's so many strands, so many things that have been going on all week, and I thought a lot of my work is on infants, and this is probably the only session here, I think, where we're going that young. So I thought it might be interesting to just start from the beginning. And I'm going to also focus on rhythm on this talk because I have limited time. And rhythm, I think, is really the most fundamental part of music. But not only music, it's the most fundamental part of life. So, rhythms are fundamental organizing principles of perception and action. They're everywhere in biological systems. So, the way we locomote, the way we talk, the way we move. This is a jellyfish that has so few neurons, it doesn't even really have a brain, and yet it might not look so nice when it's out on the sand, but in the water, it actually executes exquisite rhythmic movement. So rhythm in biological systems is absolutely ancient. This is just more evidence that you can move without too many brain cells. But of course, humans use rhythm and music in very complex social interactions. Okay, so in the beginning, if you remember nothing else, the world of the infant is musical. So the interactions that take place between caregivers and infants are exquisitely coordinated in time. So sometimes they involve turn taking. The mother will do something or the father will do something and the infant will respond, and it's kind of a back and forth, which is more sort of speech-like. But they also engage in synchronous activity, so doing things at the same time. And that's more typical of how we interact musically, where we actually have to be strictly in sync in some cases with the people that we're engaging with. And this happens not only in sound, but in movements. So the way that the mother moves, the way the infant moves, their gaze patterns, how they look at each other, and I'll show you some examples of some of these things. And also in their physiology, so in their heart rates, in their brain responses, and so on. So all of these complex systems are involved in this dynamic interaction that's already taking place between the infant and the people that are looking after the infant. And a lot of it involves music, and these interactions, we know, affect the cognitive and social development of the infant. Okay. So the way we communicate with infants is rhythmic. We talk to infants differently than we do to adults. We call it musical speech. So you probably, if you've come in touch with interacting with an infant, you probably found yourself saying, hello, how are you? And these kinds of things that if you said to an adult would be probably something wrong with you. But infants respond to that. They like the pitch contours of the infant-directed speech. They like the rhythmic patterning that's in the infant-directed speech. And so we actually call it musical speech. People also sing. Even people who might never sing in our culture, sometimes people don't sing. Some people don't sing that much, but when you give them a baby, they tend to want to sing to the baby. And interestingly, in work we've done sort of decades ago, we've shown that there are two basic styles that people use when they sing to babies. And one is a style, play song style, where they're trying to soothe the baby or put the baby to sleep. And the other is a play song style, where they're trying to engage the infant in play, like look at my face, look at interesting objects in the world. So they're engaging the infant in very early play. And so we recorded mothers. We asked them to sing a song. Half of them we asked to sing as a lullaby. Half we asked them to sing it as a play song. And then after they did that, we asked them to take the very same song, but sing it in the other way. Okay, so we have, here you see the same mother, and I'll play these two and see if you can tell which is the lullaby and which is the play song. Oops. And here's the other one. So I think it's pretty obvious. Who thought the first one was a lullaby? Yeah. Okay, so I think this is the only study we ever did in my lab where when we asked adults for ratings, they were 100% correct. Usually you don't get results like that. This is so obvious that these styles are different. So these early interactions between infants and caregivers, I think, give us tools that help us actually through the rest of our lives. And I just want to play a little video here that was recorded during the pandemic. So this is, there are care workers you can see here that are behind the um, uh, intensity doors. And then you'll see people on the other side who are not. And just look at how they interact because they're separated by these doors. Yeah, oops. Yeah, so you can see they're not only singing, they had a recording in this case that they were singing along to, but they were moving. And I'll get back again to how important movement is in the whole thing. So what is it about rhythms? Well, one thing is that they organize incoming information. So particularly in the auditory system, when I'm talking, there's probably about 5 or 6 phonemes per second in my speech, so different speech sounds that you have to group together into words and then into phrases and figure out the meaning. That is an incredible fast stream of information that you're able to just do like that. If there was not a rhythmic organization to speech, you probably couldn't do that. So it's absolutely essential for speech. Same for music. It's maybe even more essential for music. So rhythms organize time. They organize everything that we experience through time. The other thing about a rhythm is that its regularity enables you to predict the future. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So if I clap, you know exactly when the next beat is expected. Okay, so your brain is continually predicting the future. And one of the big cues to how you can predict when something is going to happen in the future is from the regularities of the past. Okay, so I'm not talking about predicting 2 years from now. I'm talking about predicting the immediate future. So rhythms are essential for that. And not only that, they then entrain our attention to particular points in time. So you might feel like you are attending continuously, say, to my voice, but in fact, I can measure your brain and find out that at the strong beats of my speech, the accented syllables of my speech, you are paying more attention. And every musician knows if you're going to make a mistake, don't do it at an obvious, point of a strong beat. Do it somewhere in the middle, right? And it won't be noticed because people cannot maintain perfect attention continuously. Okay, so if I haven't convinced you yet about the importance of timing, we now have lots of research showing that virtually all the major developmental disorders are associated with timing or rhythm deficits. So probably the most work on dyslexia, I won't talk about that because I'm going to focus on infants, but attention deficits, autism, stuttering, and a population that I work with, developmental coordination disorder, they all have issues in timing and rhythm processing. Okay, so this is a musical audience, so I really don't need to talk about this, but just so you know my terminology, there's the rhythmic surface, which is just the durations of the notes in a piece. And then from that, the brain derives a musical beat. So it derives it from the piece, but it's not the same as the piece because you can see here, this note is twice as long as this one. There's 3 notes here in the space of 1 note here. So the beat is not directly given in the music, but our brain extracts this regular beat that you can see here. So that's what you would tap your foot to. Okay, so your brain has to extract that. And then further, your brain creates a metrical hierarchy. So that if you look at the next line here, it's like every 3 beats is a strong beat. Okay, so that would be like a waltz, but if you group in groups of 2, you could do it like a march and even more complicated structures. So rhythms are not unidimensional. They have these different layers of the hierarchy. Okay, so what about infants? What do we know about the development of rhythm processing in infants? Well, going back, the earliest research on this was really done in the 1970s by my PhD supervisor, Sandra Trieb, and some others. And they found that infants, around 6 or 7 months, if you play them one rhythm and you play them a second rhythm, they could discriminate those. So they developed, I'll talk a little bit later about some of the methodologies for doing this. So it's clear infants are discriminating rhythms early in development. They also know where phrase boundaries are. They expect the music or the speech to slow down at phrase boundaries. So already they're quite good at processing rhythms, we know from this early research. So then one question is, how does the brain do this? How does the brain track the beat and metrical structures in infants? So this study that I'll just describe now, the infants were 6 months old. And we played them this 6-beat pattern that I'm going to play over and over again, because in research we often choose a particular pattern or a stimulus, and then we keep using the same one because we want to compare back to what we did before. And so we find decades later we're using the same one, and sometimes we regret the one that we chose. But in any case, this is the one, and it will keep coming back as I talk. I just want to play. Oops. You know what? I think I might have to go out to play it. Okay, so it's 6 beats. You can hear it 6 beats repeating. You can interpret it as a march. So you can hear it as 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. But you can also, if you think about it, interpret in groups of 3. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Okay, so it's what we call an ambiguous rhythm, because you can hear it one way or the other. It's very hard to hear both at the same time, although many composers have made use of going back and forth, like Leonard Bernstein. One, two, three, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. So you hear it's going back and forth in groups of 2 and then in groups of 3. Okay, so when we analyze this stimulus, this is not yet to the brain, we find the stimulus itself has energy at 3 hertz. So that's 3 beats per second. So that's the basic beat. So there's energy at the beat level, 3 times a second. There's also energy in this stimulus at the duple level, so grouping in groups of 2. So that would be half the speed, so 1.5 times a second. And then there's also energy at the triple frequency, grouping in 3s at 1 beat per second. So the stimulus itself has energy at the beat and the meter frequencies. And then the question is, what happens? What does the infant brain encode when it hears this rhythm? So we take our infant, measure their head, distract them with Big Bird, which seems our best distracting toy. And then we quickly put on this net of sensors that measure the electrical activity in the brain as neurons depolarize and fire. And when enough neurons depolarize and fire at the same time and their axons point in the same direction, it creates an electrical field at the surface of the head that we can measure. So that's basically what EEG is about. So we get the infant all set, and we're ready to play that pattern. So we just play it for them over and over again. And in the study, we look at what their brain is doing. This is the stimulus. Can you see my marker here? Yeah. This is the stimulus that I showed you. This is the infant's brain when we analyze the EEG. Their brain is tracking the beat and both meters. Okay, so they're really very good at picking up the structure of these rhythmic patterns. Interestingly as well, when we talk about excuse me, experience, we had some of the infants in the study who were in music classes with their caregivers, and others were not. And so when we broke them up into those in music classes shown in the purple and those with no music shown in the green, there was no difference in how well their brain encoded the beat frequency, but you can see the meter frequencies were better encoded by those who were getting more musical experience. Okay? Now, there could be a genetic component in there. We can't, with this study, really separate that out. But there are these individual differences already early in development that we think are experience related. Okay, so then, the next question might be, that was 6-7 months. How early can the brain track rhythms? And so in this next study I'm going to describe was done by my colleagues in France, and it took place in the neonatal intensive care units in premature infants. So we actually were able to measure their EEG when we played them that same rhythm that I just described to you. We actually played a number of rhythms, but I'm just going to show you the one. So here's their brain response, and you see those same 3 peaks for the beat frequency and the 2 meter frequencies. Already in infants who are more than 2 months premature. Okay? So when you think about it, the auditory system doesn't really, the cortical neurons don't reach the auditory cortex to make connections until about 25 weeks gestation, so almost into the 3rd trimester. So almost from the time that the cortex comes online, their brains are tracking not only the basic beat, but these meter-related frequencies. And then there's a second rhythm we looked at, but it's really just replicating the same results. So more than 2 months before birth, the brain's tracking the beat and the metrical groupings, which again really speaks, I think, to the importance, the fundamental importance of rhythm and how the brain gets wired up. So another question you might ask is, I've been talking about this ambiguous rhythm. It can be heard one way or the other. Can we have infants, can we prime infants to hear it one way or the other? And then can they maintain that internal model of either a duple or a triple grouping? Okay, which is sort of a step beyond just tracking the rhythm that's coming in. It's actually building a model and holding that model in your head. I should be mentioning when you see these people popping up here, those are the students who led these different research projects. So sometimes I forget to mention them, but yeah, Erica ran this one. So here's our 6-beat rhythm again. We primed, now we put accents, loudness accents. So half the infants heard the rhythm with accents on every 2nd beat. Half of the infants heard it with accents on every 3rd beat. Okay? Then we take the accents away and we play it for them. And when we play it now without accents, we do one other thing. So on not every 4th beat, about 12% of the time, there's a pitch change. That's what I've tried to show here by putting it higher. There's a pitch change on beat 4, and 12% of the time there's a pitch change on beat 5. So why do we do that? Well, the reason is we know that the brain, and even the infant brain, reacts to unexpected events. So remember I talked about prediction, etc.? Well, if you have a prediction that every beat is going to be the same pitch, and then occasionally we change the pitch, your brain will do a whole bunch of processing that we can measure with EEG that says, oh, whoops, I didn't expect that. Okay? So the idea here is that if we prime them to hear it with groups of 3, this is a strong beat. Right? Beat 4 is strong for groups of 3, but if they're hearing it in groups of 2, beat 5 is strong. So we expect if we primed infants to hear it in groups of 3, they should show a bigger brain response here saying, hey, I really noticed that one isn't right? But if we prime them to hear in groups of 2, they should show a bigger brain response here that this one is surprising, not what I expected. And so that's exactly what we found. So I won't go into the details of these, but this is time along this axis. So at around 200 to 300 milliseconds, we get this surprise effect, this, hey, that wasn't what I expected effect. And it's bigger, the blue, it's bigger on, if they were primed on duple, it's bigger for accent on beat 5. If they were primed in triple, it's bigger for, the pitch change on beat 4. If it's beat 5, if it's triple, it's bigger for the pitch change on beat 4, which is exactly what would be happening if they were able to maintain that internal model. So this tells us that at least as young as 6 months, and we haven't yet tested younger, they can imagine an interpretation that they can maintain internally. So already at this age, they're really pretty sophisticated. But I just want to put in a bit of a caveat, because timing in speech and music is not typically isochronous like the rhythms that we're presenting here. Usually there's a bit of, ebb and flow. You can slow down maybe at a cadence and speed up in the middle. There's expressive timing. And we're only really starting to look at how the brain tracks expressive timing, but I think it's absolutely critical to understanding how music is processed in the brain. And just to play a little example. Yeah, I hate to stop that, but then we synthesized a version without any expressive timing. Yeah, so you can hear it's not the same, right? Interestingly, we found young infants don't care which version they listen to. So maybe the aesthetics or culture, they may be culturally derived, and they may take longer to internalize and so on. So that's something for another day. But what we have found is that at least as young as 3 years of age, I shouldn't say infants, I should say children's timing expectations are affected by the melodic structure. Okay, so there's, of course, this interaction between the melodic structure and the timing that you're going to execute when you sing or play. And at least as young as 3 years, they're doing this. And the way we tested them was we created melodies. And every time they pressed a button, they got the next note in the melody. So they could time how the melody unfolded. And they would time it the same way adults would, slowing down at phrase boundaries. Already at 3 years of age, they're doing that. So if you give them a simple interface to producing the music, they will actually show a fair bit of expressive timing. Okay, so to summarize this part of the talk, very young in development, infants' brains are tracking beat and meter. As young as 6 months, they can maintain these internal models. And the perceived timing is affected by pitch content at least as young as 3 years of age. So really, the brain is set up before birth to track temporal structure and to impose these internally generated metrical interpretations. Okay, so I said at the beginning that I would get back to the idea of movement and how movement is playing a role early in development. So I'll just start by talking about some studies, quite a few studies now in adults, that indicate that just listening to a rhythm engages neural entrainment in motor areas, movement areas of the brain. Okay? So when you just listen to a rhythm and you're not moving, yes, your auditory cortex is engaged, but also, so this was an MEG study that we did where people listened to various rhythms, And these are the slices, sort of if you go from front to back of the brain. This is the auditory cortex. So the auditory cortex, so we looked for places in the brain that were tracking the rhythm. Okay, not just that might light up if there's a rhythm, but that we're actually tracking the rhythm. And so auditory cortex does, which is expected. But this is the supplementary motor area, and it also tracked the rhythm. This is the area that's involved. It's not the primary motor cortex that actually gives the signals to the muscles to move, but it's the motor planning area. So it's the area that's planning what you want, what movements you're going to do coming up. And so we now have a pretty good understanding that rhythm is not just processed in the auditory cortex, but it's actually loops between auditory cortex and motor areas, these motor planning areas of the brain. And this is why music makes you want to move to the beat. Do you know what this is already? Some of you are nodding. Yeah. Yeah. Superstition. So in a study that was done on what is the grooviest song, that was the grooviest song. It's the song where groove is defined as making you want to move to the beat. Yeah. Okay, so what about infants? Well, how early do auditory motor areas interact for rhythm? Well, infants, as you know, are pretty immature. They can't crawl yet when they're very young. They can't walk. They can't even reach very well and pick up an object. So what's going on in their brain? Are there motor connections between auditory and motor areas? Their primary motor cortex is not giving signals very well yet to the muscles to move at particular times. So we thought, well, infants might not be able to precisely move to the beat, but we can bounce them. So we asked, can infants be primed to hear an ambiguous rhythm, that same ambiguous rhythm, in the two interpretations, depending on how they were bounced? Okay, so if we move them, is that going to change how they perceive the rhythm? Okay. So this was done by Jessica Phillips Silver when she was a graduate student in my lab. And here she is bouncing one of the infants. It's good exercise. Yeah, the other thing to note is that the infants love this, right? So we had the happiest infants ever in this study. So this is the same infant, just to do the video, but we had different infants in the two groups. So here the infant is being bounced on every second beat. Okay? So just note that they're hearing exactly the same thing. The infants are hearing exactly the same thing. The only thing that's different is how they're being bounced. And then afterwards, we did a behavioral preferential looking experiment to figure out if they would prefer one interpretation or the other, depending on how they were bounced. So on each side of the infant, you can only see the one here. There's a speaker, and then there's some toys in here that can light up. So what happens in this procedure is we attract infants' attention to one side with a light and toy, and when they look, we play one of the interpretations. So we'll put accents, say, on every second beat of the pattern. As long as they look, they listen to that. As soon as they look away, we turn it off. So they're choosing how long they listen. And then we flash a light on the other side. When they look there, we play the other version. So in this case, with accents on every third beat. Okay? And we give them a bunch of those trials. They very quickly learn that they can turn the music on and off. And we see, do they prefer to listen to one or the other? And yes, they do. If they were bounced on every second beat, they prefer to listen to the pattern with accents the same way. If they were bounced on every third beat, they prefer to listen to the pattern with accents in every third beat. Okay, so even though they can't execute the motor movements themselves, how they're moving is affecting what they're hearing and how they're interpreting what they're hearing. Okay, so if you think about it, around the world, infants are being carried all the time and sung to all the time. And that movement that they're experiencing concurrently with the sound is really important for how they're developing. So we wondered if vision mattered. So we blindfolded the infants. They weren't quite as happy at this one, but they still reacted the same way. So they didn't have to be seeing anything for this. But if they just watched the experimenter move and we didn't actually move them, we did not get the effect. So that tells us it really has to do with movement. Okay, so more recently, we've been trying to take this into more naturalistic settings because, as I said, infants are experiencing this concurrent movement and singing pretty much every day of their life. So what you see here is we're setting up a mother and baby, and we're putting these little markers you can see on the head. There's these little round markers. Those are motion capture markers. They're on the feet, on the baby. They're going to put them on her shoulders, arms, and torso. And then we have 8 infrared cameras around the room. I think, yeah, you can see one back here. So they emit infrared lights. You can't see it, but it bounces off all those markers. And from the 8 cameras, the different angles, we can recreate the movement of the mother and the baby. Okay, and then we can analyze it in detail. It's the same technology that they use in the movies, when they do an avatar. They put all the markers on a real actor, and then they can analyze that and then impose those movements on like an animated figure or something like that. Okay, so here's a mother. So we asked, again, getting back to the lullaby and play song is maybe these 2 really important aspects of how caregivers are interacting with infants. We asked mothers to either sing a lullaby or to sing a play song to their baby. And so here's an example. Okay, so was she singing a play song or a lullaby? A lullaby, right? And what was the main movement she was doing? Swaying back and forth, right? What would you predict if she was singing a play song? Up and down. It's so obvious. Every time I ask people that, they know. But nobody has ever studied this before, right? So it's just such a natural thing that we do that nobody's looked at. Maybe that's important. So part of the information infants are getting when they're being sung a lullaby or a play song is not just the auditory differences, but it's the movement differences. Okay, to summarize this part of the talk, movement influences auditory rhythm perception even in infancy, and infants experience this coordinated movement and singing every day of their life. So the auditory system is already using these motor planning areas to accomplish timing very early in development. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about some of the social consequences of this. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about some very recent work we've been doing related to how infants look at faces and how singing to them is going to affect how they track, how they look at faces. So how do the rhythms of infant-directed singing affect how infants look at a singer's face? So we recorded a bunch of videos. This one's in Spanish because we're doing this at McMaster in Hamilton, but also in Granada in Spain. And so we have English versions and Spanish versions. So this is what one of the videos looks like. Oops, sorry. This is Okay, so that very infant directed, should be very interesting for infants. And then we're going to measure how the infants look at the face. So here's another example. And this infant is watching, it's a different video, but you can see the infant's reaction to the video. Okay, so they're very engaging for the babies. So I'll just show you one aspect of the data that I think is really interesting. We're very interested in how infants look at the eyes, because the eyes give a lot of information about emotion, right? And what you can see here is if we line up all the videos or all the strong beats of the singing, so these are all strong beats of the singing, the probability that infants will look at the eyes increases at the strong beats of the music, and it decreases other places. Okay? And the exact opposite is true for the mouth. They're less likely to look at the mouth on strong beats. So this tells you that there's this interaction between the auditory and the visual, right? So the singing is actually entraining how they are getting information from the face. Okay? And these systems are all getting wired up together. I'll skip that. Yeah, just to say, we're now doing this in naturalistic environments as well. So we're measuring eye tracking in the mother and the infant at the same time to see how this interacts, where the mother's looking, where the baby's looking. And then I'll just end with this last study on movement synchrony, social consequences of moving in sync with other people. So the predictability of a rhythm enables us to synchronize our movements to the beat, right? But if we're all listening to the same thing, we can move in synchrony with each other, right? And there's a bunch of studies in adults showing that when people move in sync together, doesn't even have to be for very long. Afterwards, they like each other more, they trust each other more. If you give them a game where they can cooperate or compete, they'll cooperate more. So moving in sync with other has these, we're not conscious of it usually, but it has these quite profound social effects. So again, infants can't move themselves, but we moved them. So in this case, we moved them in sync with an experimenter. And then, these are 14-month-olds, which is about the youngest age you can get overt helping. So we give the infant now a chance to help the experimenter. Okay. So that infant was very helpful. This infant bounced out of sync, so we had the experimenter bouncing at a different tempo. They were listening through headphones as to how they were going to bounce. Okay, and then what does this infant do? Okay. So, oh, do I have a slide? I guess I don't have a slide of the data, but they're about twice as likely to help after 3 minutes of bouncing in sync with the experimenter compared to bouncing out of sync. So it's really powerful. We've replicated it a number of times now. One of the things that's really interesting is that if you show them that somebody is a friend of somebody that they bounced in sync with, they'll increase their helpfulness to that friend, even though they never bounced in sync with them directly. So it transfers, it's part of this whole complex system of they're deciding who's a friend of mine, who can I trust, etc. And music and moving in sync is one of the things that they use to do that. Okay, so I can just quickly summarize and then I'd be very happy to take questions. Um, Rhythms are important for perception, organization, prediction, attention, error monitoring. They enable us to predict the future, and even the premature infant brain is tracking the temporal structure in auditory input. And then movement influences auditory rhythm perception. So for an ambiguous rhythm, we can make them hear it one way or the other. It directs attention. And this interpersonal synchrony increases affiliation and helping, so even in infants. So that's it. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Lauren. So a few quick words of comment just to warm up the audience, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. Well, first of all, thank you very much for that Stevie Wonder song. You remind me how old I am. I was 14 years old. It was at the end of the Silurian epoch. The last trilobites were lingering on the beach, and I still remember that summer. Anyway, there is a key thing that I think Lauren mentioned, amongst other, which is individual differences. Now, individual differences is about variation around the mean. And I'm saying this thing because not everybody is aware. If you are not in science, if you don't have some basics in research, you may easily lose these important things. But variation around the mean, that technically is called variance, is what evolution works on, is what natural selection works on. So people who are doing individual differences are people who, for instance, do psychopathology, people who study mental health, whereas general psychologists work more on mean effect. And one of the things I really enjoyed in listening to Laura's presentation is she's got a keen attention on both sides of the distribution, the mean and the variance. Now, this is a watershed. Sometimes people in general psychology call variance error. They don't want to see it. Whereas people who do individual differences like behavioral genetics are really keen in measuring, variance and dispersion around the mean as much as they can, for the reason I just told you, because it's about our biology, it's about our evolution, and so on and on and on. Speaking of, it might be interesting to remind ourselves that some of the genes that are influencing the perception of rhythm are the same that influence verbal abilities. So the same genes, to some extent, do the same job. They help us perceive rhythm and they help us to speak, which in evolutionary terms means that sometime, a long time ago, in our evolutionary trajectory, genes emerged that help us to become uniquely humans so that we can speak and at the same time perceive rhythm. And it's just one example of what genes do. We just have two. How many genes do we think we have? We have just 20,000 functional genes. Like the C. elegans, a small worm, we have the same number. But we do so many things that means that different genes do multiple work, like an orchestra, where the clarinet is also a double bass sometimes, or a trumpet, right? And that's another interesting aspect, if you think about it. So they emerge together in our evolutionary trajectory. And the third and last thing I'd like to bring to your attention, just to warm up, is this great, fantastic, interesting idea of rhythm, rhythmicity. There's rhythm everywhere. People who do individual differences, and I can't forget that I was trained as a shrink, and today's is World Day of Mental Health. So lack of rhythm is at the basis of so many disturbances. Lauren mentioned autism, she mentioned dyslexia. I could mention depression. If you work with kids who are depressed, one of the first things you really want to restore is their daily rhythm, making sure that some things happen regularly. And if you don't do that, you miss a lot of the picture, and your ability to help them is really smaller, right? to the point that I'm going to take one extra minute. One of the first people who realized how loss of rhythmicity is important for depression was Myrna Weisman. Myrna is a fantastic psychologist and an epidemiologist. She lost her husband relatively young, and she was sad. So she said, why am I so sad? Yes, sure, I've lost a person who was so important to me. But also she realized that she had lost the Zeitgeber, as they say in German, the pacemakers. We're living with people. We tend to tune each other to things that happen regularly during the day. And that affects our mental health. And if we lose that rhythmicity, we lose a lot of mental health. Hence, restoring this rhythmicity is key. And she was one of the first person to realize that as a widow. If you saw the presentation and rhythm and movement, the connection that Laura showed, are absolutely key. If you saw the presentation a couple of days ago by Dr. Schlaug, who works with people with extensive brain damage, he showed fantastically how these people can catch up with words, but if you engage them at the same time in tapping, the result is very much enhanced. So it's just another side that shows how the two things go together, because you can recruit different parts of the brain. To some extent, some parts of the brain can take over, to other roles and actually help and take roles that they would not usually take. That's another great demonstration. Anyways, these are the quick reaction I had to Laura's fantastic presentation. Please ask questions. Question from the audience. Don't be shy.
Hi, Laurel. Thank you for that. My name's Asher. Just maybe slightly left field, but what about, do you ever study children who are deaf? Do you ever, are visual cues, a light going off and on in a rhythm sequence, are those perceived the same way that sound is perceived?
Yeah, that's a great question. I personally have not, but there are studies of deaf children, and many of them are actually musical. So even though they may not be hearing sounds through the auditory system, they are getting rhythms, and they can really engage. I see somebody nodding over here. Maybe somebody in the audience actually has experience with that. Yeah, so yes, there are other pathways into rhythm if you don't have the auditory.
How much would the bouncing up and down perhaps influence results and processing?
Yeah, we don't know, but it's a very good question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I read Edwin's Gordon music learning theory, a researcher, and he said, I read this some months ago. I want to know what do you think about this? He said, music is not a language, but language may be a form of music. What do you think about this?
That's a very big question. So some people think language is primary and then music derived from language, and other people think music is primary and language derived from music. A sort of middle ground is to think there was sort of a proto-music language that may have had some of the characteristics of both, from which music evolved and language evolved separately. I mean, they're obviously related, and to me, they're kind of on a continuum. So language can express, very concrete meanings that we can't in music. Music can probably express emotions that are very difficult to express in language. But if you look at them structurally, they have a lot in common. In both cases, there's a small number of elements, whether it's notes or phonemes, that we combine in different ways to produce sequences with meaning. And we can find instances. So if you go to poetry, it has a rhythm, at least certain kinds of poetry. So it's sort of halfway to music. Chanting has language and music. It's sort of in between there. So we have these. There is a kind of continuum from music to language, but it's kind of like they're the extremes of the distribution. Talk about distributions, and we've come to get different meaning and different uses from the two. But fundamentally, when you look at them structurally, I think it makes sense that they really derived from some kind of common ancestor, which gets back to your point about rhythm and genes and variability and how these things may have become separated evolutionarily.
Very difficult to talk about music in a meaningful way. You remind me of Frank Zappa, Naughty Genius. Frank Zappa said, talking about music is like dancing for architecture. You just can't.
Hi. Thank you very much. Thank you, Laurel. That was a lovely presentation, very informative. So I happened to do my MA and PhD with Edwin Gordon many years ago. And I was the one who talked him into thinking that of the analogy that thought is to language what audiation is to music. And now I'm convinced that thinking musically and audiation are synonymous, and that working memory, there is musical working memory, and that the relationships that we see now, and people are doing these measurements and looking at executive functions and thinking about cognitive flexibilities and how it's related to audiation, and all of these things are connected. So we're at a point now where I think a lot of information is going to come to us through research. A lot of the work that, and he's not here today, unfortunately, Peter Schneider has been doing, and Marcus Christener is another person who recently said that based on 2 or 3 of the studies that he's done over the last 5 years or so that have to do with second language acquisition, that perhaps it's time we start thinking about language as a form of music rather than music as a language. So this is so fascinating. We're in this really interesting point. You've been doing this work for a long time, so have I, so have other, Sandra Treehub's work goes way back, Edwin Gordon's work went way back. I think we're coming to an understanding at the importance, and this is what this conference is all about, the importance, the fundamental importance of music, that it's not some fringe thing, that it's core to everything that we do as humans. So that's what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So.
Further to your comment, I ran a production company for about 25 years, and the name of the company was Think Music. And it was named because I was telling my business partner, I said, I think entire thoughts in music. I can hear it. Beethoven could hear it. You can hear it without sound. And you can think those thoughts. I wonder even, if earworms are a form of a thought you can't get out of your head. Audiation. There we go. Okay.
I might just make one further comment, which is that, as I showed you at the beginning of my talk, infant-directed speech and infant-directed song are much more similar than adult-directed speech and adult-directed song. Again, suggesting there's these common elements to both, and then they become, differentiated in perhaps the content or whatever, but the basic processes are very similar.
Hi. I was really interested in the part about the helpfulness of the toddlers, and as a mother, I actually had my now 10-year-old participate in a study. Seeing that just brought me back 10 years because he was about 14-month-old at the time. I had to look it up. At University of Toronto, I had him participate in a study where they had me wear headphones so I couldn't hear what was going on in the room. And then they, I assume, sang some kind of song to him, and then exactly like in the video, dropped something, asked him to retrieve it. And now I have a 14-month-old again. So it's just funny because I have a 10-year-old and a 14-month-old now. And I saw that and I thought, how can I use this to get my son to pick up his toys? Maybe I just need to sing to him more often. Anyways, I just wondered if you could elaborate on that a little bit more about what's the connection between the song, the sing song, and the ingratiating the child to then be helpful?
Yeah, I think the basic mechanism is that when we move in sync with other people, we like them more, and we want to please them. But yeah, I mean, it's no mistake that in a good kindergarten classroom, the teacher is musical and she sings all the time. They sing okay, now we're going to sing the cleanup song, and the kids all clean up together, right? If she didn't sing, they probably would not cooperate the same way. So I think just intuitively, music teachers know this, and they use it all the time in the classroom if they have musical skills, which is another reason why everyone should have musical skills, and everyone should have, music education. Is there
A lot of question, which is always a good sign.
I was a dance teacher at the daycare. And any time we wanted guaranteed behavior, we would sing the song, tidy up time, or whatever, get your snowsuit off, or please don't poop your pants, let's go to the toilet. So absolutely. But one of the things that I wanted to just touch on was what occurs in utero, the music movement in utero. The swaying that we do and the singing into the belly button and my daughter's dad saying Jack the Knife every single night, oddly. But it's so outside of language, musicality of the words, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I can comment on the in the womb a little bit, because the study I showed you, we measure them soon after they're born, and we can show they can do quite a lot of things. But many of these infants spend a month or longer in the neonatal intensive care unit, and that's a very noisy, unrhythmic place. So there's beeping, there's people coming in and out. They're being prodded by doctors, and they're not being held. They try to hold them, but you can't hold, especially if they're very fragile. You can't do it for long periods of time because they need to be in have the equipment hooked up. So what is the consequence of that? When they're in the womb, first of all, they're hearing the mother's voice pretty clearly. They're getting that, if she sings or talks, they're getting the rhythm from that. But also, as you said, when she walks, they're getting the rhythmic movement, and the vestibular system comes online very early. So they're experiencing that rhythmic movement every day of their time in the womb. And so one of the things that we've started now with my French collaborators is looking at, we're using music therapists in the NICU to see if we give them extra rhythmic experience, that affects the outcomes. So I think that there's some lessons that we still need to learn about all that. And so what is missing? If you're born 2 or 3 months premature, what are the important things that are missing? We don't know. Like, do those infants just catch up? Some of them seem to do really, really well. So some of them seem to catch up. Some of them don't. And we don't really understand all of the parameters yet around that. And we don't know the role of these rhythmic inputs that they're missing. Yeah. You might want to.
We probably have one last question, but I just need to go because I have my own session later on. But you can go ahead for the rest of the day. You're very welcome.
This is, please excuse me if you've already answered this because I popped in a little bit late, but it's a little bit more personal. My question for you, did the connection to music come first or the connection to science? Like what was your path to bridging and connecting those two things to get to this place?
I have a bit of a long, convoluted answer to that. So I did not grow up in a musical family particularly, but for some reason I was very attracted to music. And so in junior high school, I wanted to play flute, and I played flute. And then I studied piano. I did my ACT in flute. So I was very much into music. but I was also interested in science. And so initially I went to university in math and physics, which was fine. So I did 2 years of that, and then I ended up switching into music. And so I did a degree in music performance at U of T. And then, like, I'm pretty old, so that was back in the 70s. And then sort of computer-human interfaces were just getting big. You know, the computing was just getting really established, and so I got interested in that. So I started taking some computer science courses on the side, and then I started thinking about, you know, what is intelligence, you know, these computers, and then I thought, well, maybe I should study people. So I ended up going back and doing a PhD in psychology. So like I said, it's very long and convoluted, but I'm just happy that I was able to combine my different passions. I do, yeah. So actually, I play principal flute in the Burlington Symphony. Yeah, so yeah, we just did Beethoven 6. We're doing pictures and exhibition next month. Yeah, so yeah, yeah. So I can't imagine not playing. Yeah, but I think these days there's more recognition of music. Like, you know, when I started, nobody was studying music. They thought it wasn't even important scientifically. So I think that we really need yeah, 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 and also the you know, the music side and the education side. We need them to understand, like, what are the questions? Like, the scientists need to know what are the fundamental questions that musicians have. What are the fundamental questions that are needed for education? So I think it's really very much a two-way street. And like, yes, it should be more, but compared to 30 years ago or 35 years ago, it's way better now than it was then. Yeah. So.
I need to go. I have my own. But please feel welcome to go ahead. Thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you, everybody.